Hello and welcome to another edition of Fishing for Answers. Today, I am privileged to have a very special guest with us. We've got Fred Kwong, and he is the CISO over at DeVry University. Do you want to introduce yourself real quickly?
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
No,
Fred
thank you.
Kwong, as mentioned, CISO of DeVry University. I've been with the organization around 2.5 years, been in the cyber industry for a little over 20 at this point, and really, really thankful to be here and take this time to just have a great conversation.
Awesome. So I don't even know where to start. I'd love to learn a little bit about you. How'd you get into cybersecurity in the first place? What led you into academia? Give us the lowdown.
Yeah, so I'll kind of give you my 30-second elevator pitch of who I am in that sense. So I started my career in IT, working my way from help desk with no IT knowledge whatsoever, and just kind of built my career learning about networks, then systems, and everything related to the infrastructure side of the IT world. From there, I eventually learned more about route switches, then into firewalls, and then eventually into the security realm. And with that step, I had to take on a lot more, learning through security, not only the technical components, but then also some of the other softer side of security, such as governance, risk, and compliance, and ultimately moving up through the ladder and then learning about business acumen that's 100% needed as part of the role as the CISO, and moving and learning to talk with the executives and the boards around why security is important and why there's such a need for it in this day and age.
I really do think that one of the things that's missing in our industry is that business acumen. It's difficult to balance priorities when you don't understand the business side of it. And so I think that adds an additional layer of understanding to the overall picture when you do have that experience. Because I know my perspective has changed drastically at sort of each evolution of my career. I started out, I was an ethical hacker. Oh, and I was rigid. I loved the stick over the carrot, the things like that. But then I became a CISO, and I got a lot better at balancing that business case, and understanding that it was not my job to manage or to even manage risk, but it was my job to communicate risk and help manage risk, which is a little bit different. And then I became a CEO, and I realized I didn't know what security was anymore. I joke, but no, it's I like that you brought that part out. So very cool background. There's so much to the human element of cybersecurity. Before we got started, you were talking about how you're very passionate about building that secure culture. What tips do you have for maybe younger CISOs or even people just starting out in their career to help make what they're doing more successful and to help them, sort of be able to better build that secure culture?
Yeah, I would say that in my younger years, even before I became a CISO, right, I was so focused on the technical controls and I was pounding myself in the head. And why isn't the company understand how important security is, and why aren't they taking this seriously, and why am I not getting funding, and all these why questions, right? Because
Yeah.
I had such this passion around the threat actors and the threat of cybersecurity, but I was really asking the wrong questions, right, and targeting the audience incorrectly. And it wasn't until I, got some mentorship and really kind of understood the role of a security leader that I was starting to be able to build the case as to why security is important and how to build a secure culture. And
Yeah.
that's the one piece of advice I would give to either my former self or those looking to aspire to or being a CISO, is that it's not just about the technology. It really is about understanding the business needs, the business drivers, and understanding where does security fall into that overall program. It's not that executives don't care about cybersecurity. In fact, most of them will say that is one of the most important risks that they're trying to balance right now. But they need to understand the context of that risk as it applies to all the other enterprise risks that exist inside of the organization, and make those right decisions for the organization as to what they need to do. And so, the advice I would say is twofold. One, don't get frustrated by that, but seek to understand the business and how we're trying to drive business value with cybersecurity. But then also, don't forget that security is more than technology and controls. There is a culture that you need to build in terms of making your
Yeah.
organization more cyber prepared. Our employees are the first and last line of defense when it comes to security. And unless you're taking the time to spend and really drive a culture of security knowledge and security value, you're never going to exceed or excel in terms of building that inside of the organization.
I agree. I think that too often that when we're looking at culture and things like that, there's a lot of programs that sort of accept failure. It's that old adage, you can't patch stupid, and I truly believe that the difference in attitude and approach can be the difference between us being successful at changing our weakest link into our greatest defense, or being unsuccessful and them remaining our greatest defense. But like you said, it's all about culture.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that people that kind of grew up in technology often struggle with as well. And now, Josh, you had mentioned, about my education background. One of the unique things about me is I actually have a doctorate in organization development, and as part of that, we learned a lot about how to build culture, how does culture survive, and the honesty behind it is culture is not easy, and culture change is actually very difficult. So when you are trying to build a security program and you're trying to build a secure culture inside the organization, that is not something that is, hey, do some CBTs around phishing or security awareness, and also people's mindsets change. Culture change is very difficult. Ask anyone that's in that field, and that's kind of the point I want to make, is that you're not going to be a culture change expert. And so you need to partner with people to know how to build and drive culture changes inside of the organization. If you really want to be successful in terms of driving home a security program, it's so interesting that if you think about the security stack and where the security dollars go, right? That awareness and phishing training and those are other components where those, again, some of the softer components of security, we don't put a lot of emphasis on, but it's so important. And when you think about the funding that's needed to actually drive culture change in an organization, it can be very difficult. And culture change is difficult in general. There's a lot of organizations that try to change their culture and fail. So working with experts, working with people that really understand culture change, you might be able to find those internally inside of your own organization. If you have an organizational development arm of the org or your HR arm of your organization, you can try to find those culture change leaders and partner with them in terms of how do you build and sustain culture change as it relates to security.
I like that. So my background is, well, I guess I taught myself to code way back in high school, but then I went to college for marketing. And after that, I spent like 10 years in marketing. One day I discover ethical hacking, and I switched my career literally that day. Well, I wouldn't say I got a job that day, but I decided to switch my career that day. And I went into ethical hacking, and now I've been in security for over 20 years. But I bring this up because one of the things, my very first physical assessment, I was able to talk my way into a bank vault. I realized, hey, I'm pretty good at the social engineering thing, and it caused me to really dig, deep on social engineering. And then one day I asked, well, how can we use these same tactics that the bad guys are using against us in order to get our people to engage more in the training, to drive better retention and all of that? And so it pushed me down the path of, well, we've got a lot of proven behavioral science out there that we know how things work. It's just not been applied to cybersecurity yet. How do we apply it? And I found all kinds of really interesting areas that I frequently talk about it. And I wonder if that's not a fun area for us to go down. So you went down that organizational change management culture shift. So maybe let's play with or go down that path a little bit for a
Sure.
while and talk psychology and organizational change and all of that. So, if you had like a couple top principles that you think everyone should be cognizant of as they're building out their programs, what might they be?
Maybe the first one I would start with is humanize the approach, right? And what do I mean by that? Well, you need to understand what people are inherently interested in for themselves, right? Not to say that people are inherently selfish, but they think about themselves, their family. Those are things that oftentimes matter most to most people. And
Absolutely.
so,
Start with why.
yeah. And so helping them to understand why is security important for themselves, and then taking those principles and then applying it into the workforce. So for example, one of the things that we did in my organization is really focus some security training around how to secure your home, right? What does that mean from a physical perspective, but then also cyber perspective? We also talk to our employees around, hey, what do you need to know about social media and how does that affect your kids, right? And so when you talk to them about things that are important to them and they matter, those same principles and things that are used to protect their kids, their home and family can then be applied back into the workplace. So you don't have to necessarily train them like, here's how security works at, DeVry or whatever organization you're part of. Just help them understand, here's some principles that make sense for you to understand as someone that's just trying to protect yourself or your family. And then they can right away understand how that needs to be applied to the workforce very easily.
Okay. Yeah, no, I like it and I agree because security is intertwined.
Mhm.
If somebody is a threat at the workplace, they're probably a threat to their own security too, or vice versa. And so, if I'm plugging in my device and I click and get malware on my device every night when I take it home because, every time I see a new piece of clickbait about P Diddy, I click on it. Well, I'm potentially getting the company infected because I bring that malware in and I connect into the company network. And so, yeah, it's so intertwined, and I think that that's one of those things that particularly Americans need to be more cognizant of, is the fact that there is a very real threat out there and it is very much targeting us. Because I think one of the luxuries of being in this country is that we have not had threats on our doorstep in a very, very long time. But I think it also it puts so much distance from the real world threats like wars and things that are happening around the world that we're not as cognizant. The population, they're the people that I have, because I've got users all over the world speaking all kinds of different languages. And I will say my users in war torn countries are so much more secure, so much less likely to fall for a phish than my users in countries that haven't seen war on their doorstep in a very long time. And to me, it's because the internet redrew the battlegrounds or the lines, the whatever you want to call it, and because of that, now our living rooms, our boardrooms are potentially a target.
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of companies use the same tactic when they try to either uh, come up with new features or functionalities. So there's a personal edition of some sort of software, and then there's an enterprise edition, right? And most of these companies they test um, the features and functionality in that quote unquote personal edition, and then use it later on to apply to their professional edition. And threat actors think very much the same way. Hey, I'm going to try this on some unassuming personal people, and then if it works well, I can most likely turn those same tactics and techniques and use that against a organization, or targeting people inside of an organization, right? So
Yeah.
we have to be thinking of it in that same manner, and making sure that as we try to protect again ourselves and our families, those same techniques that are used to target us can be used against our companies as well.
Oh, absolutely, they can. So, one of my favorite behavioral science principles that I think we should apply and utilize more in our security awareness training is just space learning theory, which I'm sure you're aware of. But for the audience, I'll talk through. But it's just where it talks about how when we break content or anything into tiny little bite-sized pieces and we feed it to people at a high frequency, we get really high retention. And I feel like we need more micro training in this space, and not 5-minute videos or 15-minute videos. That's not micro training. Truly micro training, like 15 to 60 seconds in length max.
Yeah, there's I 100% agree with you. That micro training is what we've seen that is at least excuse me, um, we've seen from the education space to be very effective, right? Um, and the struggle for CISOs, I think, is we still have a lot of regulation, and we have a lot of mandates that still require hey, you need to train your person, 60 minutes or whatever the case may be, the old style
Yeah.
knowledge learning track, and doing these CBTs and the quiz at the end, because that's what, and we all know legislation and compliance vehicles are slow to change, right, with the time.
They are, for sure.
And so even myself, I struggle with that concept of, here I need to do certain things to meet from a compliance perspective, but then when I think about how our people actually learn, it's a lot different, right?
Yeah.
But 100%, if we can get away with doing small bite-sized quick action chunks, that absolutely makes a lot of sense. But just know that there are going to be times where you're going to have to do some things maybe that don't make the best sense, but you're doing it because you need to check some boxes.
Compliance. Yeah. No, I mean, I know that struggle firsthand. Having a content company, and us focusing and really specializing in micro training, it was difficult, to say the least, to figure out how to get the best of both worlds there. But product aside, I definitely know what you're talking about. So we talked about, on the behavioral, or I guess the not change management, but the behavioral science side of things. So what is something else? You said start with why. I agree that that's so important, or make it human to the person. Sorry if I said it in different words, not trying to put words in your mouth. What are maybe some other principles that you like, that you think maybe more or should be applied more within the industry?
Something else I'll mention is, I know it's a little bit of a buzz term at this point, but the gamification of the training is pretty valuable in my opinion as well. It's the things that make training fun, and exciting or enjoyable. And when things are fun and enjoyable, they're oftentimes more remembered, right? Because you can tie an emotion to it. If you think about it, a lot of the training, after you're done with the training, it's not emotional. It's, in fact, it's just flat, right? And so in that sense, retention comes much harder. But if you think about favorite songs, or if people remember back to like moments that they're proud of, there's usually an emotion tied to it. And so that's what you kind of want to do by using things like gamification to tie an emotional aspect to that training, so that they can remember a little bit more of the details behind it, remember the reasons why we did these things. And I think that's important. So there's technologies and techniques out there to do gamification. You can do something fun, even something as a silly quiz things that we do as part of Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Or you can do things like escape rooms, right? Virtual escape rooms, something to make it so that, again, the ideas and the processes click so that they're remembered better.
So I might even argue that the gamification element is critical. And the point that I would make there, beyond just making it more fun and more engaging and getting that emotional response, which is all, incredibly critical. That emotional response creates new neural pathways, which help to increase retention.
Yep.
But on the phishing side of things in particular, I've seen so many times where employees feel hurt, they feel abused, they feel betrayed, they feel tricked. And those negative emotions are caused because of phishing. Not always, but to me, gamification is how we solve that problem. We tell the user we're going to phish them. If they don't know when it's going to come, then if they click on it, or if they don't click on it, you've already taken that potentially negative situation and disarmed it. So to me, I think there's another element at play there too, in that you can help to create a better user experience where, we're not potentially pissing them off.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There is definitely certain individuals that will, look at something phishing and they'll say that, hey, you were trying to be dishonest with me, and why are you doing this? I'm a busy individual. I have things that I'm doing already. I don't have time to play your, games, quote unquote, right? In that sense.
Yeah.
And that's definitely not what we want to convey as an organization, or what we want to do as to each individual, right? So to your point, if there's ways that we can still provide the message in a way that is meaningful and fun, and make it worthwhile, then I think that is the best path forward.
I like that. Okay, so I like this direction, all psychology so far. So another principle that I think really applies to cybersecurity is identical elements theory, which for the audience or the viewers, it talks about how when somebody learns about something really well, they will see it everywhere. The classic example is that you buy a new car and all of a sudden you see that car everywhere on the road. Well, where I feel that this applies inside of cybersecurity is that if at the moment you click on that phish, I make sure that you realize your mistake, have that emotional response to your point, Fred, about the emotional interaction there. But not only do I realize my mistake, but I have really succinct, easy to understand, like, hey, here were the red flags that you could have identified. And now as I learn those red flags, those, different ways that I could have identified that email, and I learn them well, I'll start to see them everywhere. And I feel like that's how we plant human virus definitions and make people, or harden people really, against phishing attacks.
Yeah, I agree with you. That immediacy of the response, right? And the immediacy to see, hey, here's where we went wrong as individuals, and then here's the things that you need to be able to pick up on next time, right? These are some telltale signs as this is a phishing attempt. I think is really important is the immediacy of that contact, and then the context behind it, right? So, going back to what we were talking about before, right? Part of that immediacy is just letting them know, hey, we're not here to fool you, we're here to educate. And that educational piece being succinct and immediate, I think, is really important. And then tying that, even if you can, to um, again, some sort of rewarding aspects to say, hey, thanks for taking the time, or just making sure that they know that we know we took some time away from you, and we appreciate you taking the time to, you know, look through and understand the reasons why behind this fish. I think that goes a long way as well. It's that, again, tying back to another emotional response, which is that reward factor.
So I like this, and it's something that I'm seeing talked about a lot more in the industry as of late. And that is, we've got to give people kudos. We seem to only be good about, cracking the whip and saying, "Hey, you're terrible. You clicked on this. You have a bad password," or whatever it happens to be, right? But when do we go and we say, "Hey, great job. You're awesome at cybersecurity"? And that's something that rarely happens. And to me, it's the when they report fish that you have a unique opportunity to say, "Hey, great job." I suppose when they don't click on a fish, you have an opportunity to, but that's a little harder because you may just confuse them as well. But right when they report that fish, it seems to me like it's a great opportunity to say, "Hey, great job. You rock. You're a rock star," and build their confidence, which in turn is going to get them to report more fish.
Yeah, 100%. And so at our organization, we have that immediate response, but then we also follow it up with their we call it the Fish Hunter of the Month award, right? Where we give them a
I
little
like
something
that.
at the end of the month. You know, we put them in a raffle, and they get some reward points from us, which can be used to, get some DeVry swag or whatever the case may be from our store. So it's another way to just, again, appreciate them. We kind of highlight them in our workspace notification, and just let them know, hey, we appreciate you being a fish hunter, being someone that's helping our organization be safe. And again, it just brings that message out, hopefully, to others that see that. And it's like, hey, I can be a fish hunter too, and I can win some cool stuff as well, right? So it's a little bit of a win-win from that perspective.
You're giving me product ideas. So I think we're going to have my customers are going to have a fish hunter of the month in the very near future here. I love it. Um, that's very cool that you do that. And I got to imagine you've seen a drastic increase in reporting since you implemented that.
We've definitely seen an increase in reporting. I'll be honest in saying, is it at the levels I'd like it to be? Probably not, but
Are they
um,
ever where we want them to be?
that's just the reality, right? I shoot high for where I'd like us to be in terms of our culture, but understandably, a lot of times I think people know to delete, don't always necessarily report, right? So again, that's some more work that we have to do on our side, because that reporting, and again, it goes back to that education. That reporting helps us to then feed back into our uh, phishing slash spam filtering software as well, that hopefully we can then catch it, and then it doesn't hit some of the colleagues, right? So
Yeah.
bringing in that importance, helping them understand why this is important to us, why we need you to report and not just email. All those things go into helping to build that secure culture.
I like it. Okay, so I think that's a really good time to segue over to KPIs. Because as we're measuring it, you were talking about some metrics that you'd like to see higher. Not without talking about your KPI specifically. What do you feel are the most critical KPIs inside of human cybersecurity?
That's a great question. It's something I've been struggling a little bit with, right? Because currently we've been doing a lot of um, fish reporting, and then also click rates, right, as reports to phishing. And I don't feel as though those are the best KPIs to have, quite honestly. Um, what I'm looking for and trying to understand is there a more valuable way that we can, number one, present the data, but then two, um, help us strive to be a more culturally aware organization, and how best to measure that. I quite honestly, I'm still struggling a little bit.
I got some ideas there, actually. Well, first of all, I think that those are the two most critical metrics that directly allow you to measure some aspect of your security awareness. I do think, however, that those are more leading metrics, because at the end of the day, if my awareness program's effective, it should impact, my three core metrics. Am I reducing my number of incidents? Am I reducing my time to detection? Am I reducing my time to resolution? But was talking to a CIO recently when I was over at a CIO symposium at MIT. And this question came up about culture and how can we measure it. And I heard a really good bit of advice, and that was that if we can measure the average amount of time that it takes to mitigate or triage the human susceptibility or risk of that new hire, and we can measure that, and that time shrinks over time, that reduction in how long it took to mitigate the new employee now versus 12 months from now is how you quantify the culture. Because the only thing that can explain it, if you're doing the same training, is a shift in culture if your people are getting more secure more quickly after you've implemented whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, so some of the things I've been thinking about in that same vein, right, is it's not necessary, because that's, to me, that's a reaction piece, right? I'm looking to measure culture from a proactive perspective, and let me give you an example of that. So before Fred steps into a meeting, right, um, there are people on that call that are already saying, well, how do we make sure that this connection is secure? And, how do we know that our data is going to the right places? And, hey, have we talked to the CISO about this yet? Right.
Yeah.
So that, to me, it's that security mindedness that you want not only our IT partners to have, but our business partners to have when they think about things like a M&A or a new technology that they're looking to onboard. They're thinking about these security questions even before I'm prompting them, right? And that's when I know, the best feeling in the world is when I don't have to say anything about security on a call, because everybody else has already been trained to ask the right questions around security that I don't have to, right? And
Yeah.
to your point, that's when I know the security culture has been embedded in the organization. But again, I still struggle in terms of like how to measure that. I can't be like, times Fred has to be in a meeting to talk about security is, growing less over the years, or whatever the case may be.
But what if you could put it into ServiceNow or something where, like, every time somebody had a concern, they put it in there, and that way you could track it?
Potentially.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Just thinking out loud here about
I'm with
because
you.
I like that. I mean, that is way more proactive, and you're right. I mean, that is a very, very good measure of culture there.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Well, I certainly like it. I mean, I think that, the problem with KPIs are so many of them are leading metrics, and they're
Mhm.
not our core metrics. And the leading metrics are great, but I feel like sometimes vendors try and get us to look at the leading metrics over the actual core metrics.
Yeah, it's a lot of the KPIs right now, especially in this called phishing and education space, are really tied to uh, I want to say what they're providing in terms of that security program
Yeah.
versus how to measure again that culture change inside of the organization. And it's not to say those metrics are important, because they are, but it is one dynamic, right? One piece of the
Mhm.
lens at the end of the day when you talk about the holistic culture change that you're trying to drive. Again, I don't have all the answers. One day maybe I'll get there, but if I do, I'll definitely share.
Well,
We can do
I
this. Yeah.
say it's a successful podcast if a question comes up that we don't they have any answers to. That's a good podcast there. And I can start then asking that question to every other guest on the show until we get an answer.
Okay.
I really like it. So let's go back to phishing. Because I feel like that's a really critical area, but it's one of the areas that I feel like it can easily be done wrong or it can easily be done right. And I feel like the difference makes just a drastic difference on the impact of your culture within the organization and everything else. So, what are maybe some tips that you've learned over the years to make your phishing better on the users and just better in general?
I think there's a couple things that I would say that are important. The first one is if you are starting phishing off net new, right? In the sense that you've never done phishing in an organization before, and your company has never seen this type of attempt in terms of that culture change through awareness, then you want to start off with, I would say, easier fishes, right? Get people used to the idea of it's back in the day of the we all know the Nigerian prince fish, right? Because it is so horrific that everyone goes, yes, of course that's a fish, right?
They
And so you
arrested a bunch of Nigerians last week. They
I
found the
know
prince.
it's fantastic, but it's getting them used to the idea. Oh, okay, this is what they're doing. They're kind of prompting me to like think about or understand, types of phishing. Once you get to a certain level, you want to kind of increase the difficulty because you want to share with them some of the newer tactics and techniques that the threat actors are using, and then kind of increase that level of difficulty. And then with that, of course, the education that kind of comes along with it that we talked about. So that's what I would say. One of the things you want to do is kind of ease into it. Let them know it's coming, to your point, something new that we're trying to do. But also, the other thing to keep in mind is we only want to add so much friction to the organization. And that's really critical as security leaders. And again, talking about metrics that matter, the amount of friction that security causes is something that we should measure and try to minimize in organizations as much as possible. Security is always how much risk are we willing to take on versus, again, how much friction that we want to put in. The old adage being the most secure computer is the one that's not connected on the internet, right? So, do we all need to be Tom Cruise to use a computer? I mean, we don't want to necessarily go down that path, but figuring out what's the right amount of friction that we're adding, because the more friction we add, the less our employees are able to, kind of do to get their job done, right? The less time they have. So we definitely need to be mindful of that and making sure that our organization is aligned with the amount of friction that we have inside of the organization. The other piece I'll mention kind of around phishing and phishing campaigns is that once again, we get to that more advanced stages, we might want to do things that are targeted to specific areas that each organization is going to see. So, it doesn't make sense to send a sales phishing campaign over to the IT team, right? Because they're going to spot it right away. They're not going to even care because they're like, there's some sales thing that doesn't apply.
And the bad guys are using role-based phishing against us already too.
100%, yeah. So we want to make sure that we're showing them the real types of threats that are happening or the types of attacks so that they can see it. And then hopefully they'll be reminded of that when they see the real ones that come through. Because as much as I think we have strong controls in terms of phishing prevention and, phishing blocking, we know that it's a game of cat and mouse, and there's always something that's probably going to get through.
Oh, yeah. I mean, every other day there's a new piece of malware that can get past, the major EDRs that are the best, right? And so it's not that they're not good at blocking stuff; it's that the bad guys are really good at getting around it too. And so you're completely right. You said a few different things there that I want to dig into. One of them was about friction within the organization, and I couldn't agree more. Our job is, we should be very cognizant of that amount of friction, and I think that one of the areas that we often cause some of the most friction is around security awareness. In fact, most of the time, that's the first interaction anyone ever has with cybersecurity is, hey, you didn't do your training. And so I do think the more we can, streamline, make it easy to understand and simple to understand for them, the easier it is to get them to actually do it. And then the less we are, that annoying organization that comes at them once a year to harass them about their training.
Yeah. And then, the other thing is, make it easy, make it consumable in that sense. So, are we providing that training in a way that's easy for them to access and then easy to consume? And just an example is, I don't know how many companies have this, but how many companies can support phishing training on a mobile device, just as an example, right?
Yeah.
People are on their mobile devices all the time. Hey, can I take a couple minutes and do this while I'm on the train, or right before bed, or whatever the case may be. And make it where they are at, right? Instead of forcing them to come, hey, you got to click on this site to get to our training portal, then to get to our security training, right?
Yeah.
Because that's not going to be top of mind. That's not part of their routine. But
well, and what about your employees with disabilities too? I mean, the more accessible it is, the easier it is for them too.
Yeah. So those are things that we're going to strive for. Again, we're not there today, but I do know that there's areas that we can always improve, and that's just one of them, right?
Okay. So we're almost out of time here, and I hate it because I could talk about psychology all day, and I feel like we could go back and forth quite a while longer here before we ran out of stuff to talk about. That being said, it is Security Awareness Month, so I'm asking two questions of everybody to end the show this month. And one is, what are you doing for Security Awareness Month? And then number two is, what advice do you have for the non-technical, that security awareness training for just whoever happens to maybe see this on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever?
Yeah. So what are we doing this month? We're doing a lot of great stuff this month. We have specific campaigns going out with specific messages around different types of threats that are happening, things that people need to worry about. So we have messaging around sextortion. We have messaging around how to keep your family safe this month. We have messaging around identity protection. We're doing videos. We're doing like small snippets. We're doing an Ask Me Anything with myself as well. And we're doing some gamification. So we're kind of mixing it up, doing a lot of different things this month, something new every week. Hopefully our employees are enjoying it. And then in terms of kind of staying informed, there's a lot of different places that you can definitely go from the family side. There is, oh man, I'm going to draw some blanks, but CISA has some great resources that you can look to from an awareness perspective. Department of Homeland Security also does as well.
AARP for your parents.
Yeah, absolutely. Better Business Bureau does as well from if you're a
small businesses,
small business. So a lot of great resources out there. And then, there's a lot of great resources from, podcasts and, things like on YouTube as well. So take advantage. Just do a quick Google search and a lot of great stuff is going to pop up.
Yeah, and train your people if nothing else. I mean, it's one of the lowest cost, best things that you can do to help people be more aware. So, even if you have zero budget, you can still talk about cybersecurity and stuff. I love it. This has been a really, really great episode. I'm definitely going to have you back on the show. But for now, I'm going to have to say goodbye. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.